Why was she walking toward the gate alone and out of uniform on her very first day of command? The morning sun cut across the base like a slow-moving blade, painting the gray asphalt in gold. Colonel Sarah Martinez adjusted the strap of her small leather handbag, her steps measured, her face unreadable. She wore no rank on her shoulders today, just a simple white blouse, dark jeans, and the quiet confidence of someone who had already survived wars both visible and invisible. She didn't want to be recognized, not yet. It wasn't vanity or pride, it was a test, one she'd planned carefully on the flight from Washington. She wanted to see the base for what it really was before her presence changed anything. No ceremony, no salutes, just the truth. Fort Henderson stood ahead like a sleeping giant, a sprawl of barracks, motor pools, and tired flagpoles. It was a place that had once represented excellence but now looked forgotten. The kind of base that carried stories of lost pride, low morale, and leadership that had looked the other way too many times. Sarah slowed as she reached the checkpoint. Two guards occupied the booth, Private Johnson, young, jittery, the sort of soldier who still thought discipline was optional before 900 hours, and Sergeant Williams, older, grounded, but dulled by routine. They didn't see her approach. Johnson was laughing about his weekend, coffee in hand. Williams was half listening, half bored, his eyes scanning the road more out of habit than duty. Sarah stopped just short of the window, her gaze sweeping across the details that told the story of this post long before anyone spoke. The streaked glass, cigarette butts near the curb, and the flag above them hanging wrinkled and tired, not folded properly from the night before. Discipline dies in the details, she thought. She stood there for a moment, watching them, invisible yet commanding the space. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, deliberate, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. "Excuse me, gentlemen." Private Johnson looked up, eyebrows raised as though someone had interrupted his breakfast. Yeah, can I help you?" He didn't stand, didn't salute, didn't even put his coffee down. Sarah smiled faintly. "So this is where it starts." "I'm here to enter the base," she said simply, placing her identification card and transfer orders on the counter. Williams barely glanced up. Johnson took the documents, flipping them lazily as if they were grocery coupons. His eyes moved across the lines with confusion. "Ma'am, this says you're a colonel," he said finally, disbelief dripping from his tone. "But you're not in uniform." She nodded. "That's correct." "I'm gonna need to verify this," he muttered, already turning to Williams. The sergeant finally stood, adjusting his belt as if that would lend authority to the moment. He took the papers, scanning them more carefully than his subordinate, yet still wearing that faint, skeptical squint. "Colonel Sarah Martinez," he read aloud. "Transfer of command, Fort Henderson, effective immediately." He exhaled slowly, as if waiting for the punchline. "We didn't get any notice about a new co." "You'll find that's correct," Sarah said. "Communications have been inconsistent lately." Williams frowned. "I'm going to call the command office." "Of course," Sarah replied, her tone professional, not defensive, not impatient, just steady. As the sergeant turned away to make the call, she studied the booth again. Food wrappers, a stack of personal magazines, an old radio half broken. It wasn't the mess that bothered her, it was what it meant. A base loses its sharpness the same way a knife dulls, one careless moment at a time. Johnson, meanwhile, was still staring at her with the skeptical eyes of someone trying to reconcile a mental picture that didn't fit. "Ma'am, you don't really look like a colonel," he said finally. She tilted her head. "And what does a colonel look like, Private?" He hesitated. Older, I guess. Maybe a uniform, some ribbons, that kind of thing." She smiled again, but this time there was a glint of steel in it. "Interesting observation." From inside the booth, Williams' voice drifted out, anxious, clipped. "Yes, sir. She's here right now. Civilian clothes, orders look legitimate. No, we didn't get a notice. A pause, then the sergeant's voice shifted tone from doubt to something close to fear. Yes, sir. Understood. When he came back to the window, his posture was different, rigid, respectful. He placed her documents carefully on the counter and cleared his throat. Ma'am, the command office confirms your identity and your orders. I apologize for the confusion. Sarah accepted her papers with a polite nod. Thank you, Sergeant. May I proceed? He reached for the control to lift the gate, and froze when Private Johnson stepped forward. Wait. His voice was firm, loud enough to make Williams flinch. I don't care what somebody said on the phone, Johnson declared, crossing his arms. This lady's not in uniform. You can't just let civilians walk in here saying they're colonels. Williams spun toward him. Johnson. No, Sarge, we have procedures for a reason. She needs to be in uniform or have a visitor's pass. Otherwise, we're breaking protocol. Sarah stood motionless, watching the scene unfold with a detached curiosity. The private's conviction might have been admirable if it weren't rooted in arrogance and ignorance. Williams' face turned pale. Private, that was the command office. They just confirmed. I don't care, Johnson interrupted, his voice rising. Rules are rules. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The sound of the wind tugging at the flag above them was the only movement in the world. Then Sarah exhaled quietly. Private Johnson, she said softly. He turned toward her, chest puffed out in false confidence. Yes, ma'am. I appreciate your dedication to rules, but let me explain something about the military you serve in. Her tone changed, still calm, but edged now with the weight of authority. There's a difference between following rules and understanding them. The purpose of protocol is discipline, not defiance. When your sergeant verified my orders with command, that was the end of your authority in this matter. Johnson opened his mouth, but she raised a hand, a small gesture, quiet, final. She pulled out her phone and made a quick call. Her words were measured, professional, and loud enough for both guards to hear. This is Colonel Martinez. I'm at the front gate. Please send an escort from headquarters. A pause. Yes, I'm aware of the confusion. No disciplinary action yet, but we'll need to review gate procedures. When she hung up, both soldiers stood frozen. 5 minutes. That's all she gave them. 5 minutes to realize the weight of what they'd done. Johnson's voice cracked. Ma'am, we were just following. What you didn't know, she interrupted, is that discipline starts with respect. You questioned your sergeant. You ignored confirmation from your command office. And you judged an officer's legitimacy based on how she looked, not what her credentials said. William straightened immediately, his throat tight with shame. Ma'am, we should have handled it differently. Yes, Sarah said, but this isn't just about you. This gate represents the entire base. How you behave here reflects what happens behind it. Headlights appeared down the road, a sleek black sedan approaching fast. Sarah glanced at her watch, right on time. When the car stopped, 3 officers stepped out, a major, a colonel, and the base sergeant major. Their crisp uniforms and sharp bearing contrasted painfully with the scene before them. The major's face was red with embarrassment. Colonel Martinez, he said, snapping a perfect salute. Ma'am, on behalf of Fort Henderson, I deeply apologize for this situation. Sarah returned the salute. Thank you, Major. I believe this has been illuminating. Behind her, Johnson's hands trembled slightly. Williams looked like he wanted to vanish into the asphalt. The major gestured toward them. Private Johnson, Sergeant Williams, explain yourselves. Johnson stammered. Sir, we were just following security protocol. Sergeant Major Thompson's voice cut through the air like a whip. Protocol doesn't mean insubordination, soldier. You had confirmation from command and still refused an officer entry. The color drained from the young man's face. Sarah stepped forward before the humiliation went further. Her tone softened not for them, but for the lesson. "Gentlemen," she said to the senior officers, "if I may speak with them privately before any decisions are made." The major blinked in surprise. "Of course, ma'am." As the others stepped aside, Sarah turned back to the two guards, their faces pale, their posture stiff. "You both made mistakes," she began, "but mistakes are only fatal if you refuse to learn from them." Johnson swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I should have trusted my sergeant's judgment and respected your rank." "That's part of it," Sarah said, "but the bigger issue is assumption. You saw a woman in jeans and decided she couldn't be who she said she was. In this uniform, we don't judge by appearance. We judge by conduct." A beat of silence, then the approaching hum of the sedan's engine restarting. Sarah nodded toward them. "You'll see me again soon, and when you do, I expect you both to remember that leadership is not about knowing who's in charge. It's about knowing how to follow." The gate lifted. She walked past them, calm, silent, her footsteps echoing the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to prove herself, only to lead. Behind her, the young private whispered, barely audible, "She really is the new commander, isn't she?" Sergeant Williams exhaled slowly. "Yeah, kid, and we just learned what leadership looks like." The black sedan door opened, and Sarah stepped inside. Through the window, she looked back once, not with anger but with resolve. The base she was about to command was broken, complacent, and in need of something far more powerful than orders. It needed discipline, rebuilt from the inside out. And this morning was only the beginning. She didn't speak for most of the drive. The black sedan hummed quietly along the worn roads of Fort Henderson, its tires crunching over gravel that hadn't been swept in weeks. The officers inside stole glances at her reflection in the window, each unsure if silence meant calm or quiet rage. Major Harrison shifted in his seat. "Ma'am, again, our sincerest apologies for—" "Don't apologize," Sarah interrupted softly. "Just show me." "Show you, ma'am." "The truth," she said, eyes still fixed on the passing scenery. "Show me what this base has become." Outside, Fort Henderson unfolded like a forgotten photograph. Faded paint on barracks, soldiers walking with their hands in their pockets, a flagpole that leaned slightly to one side. Everywhere she looked, small signs whispered of neglect, not chaos, not rebellion, just the slow erosion of pride. It was the kind of decay you didn't see in one day, but felt after 1,000. Major Harrison cleared his throat. "Ma'am, the transition's been difficult since the last commander left. Morale took a hit, and we've been short-staffed on." "Don't explain it," Sarah said. "I'll see it myself." She wasn't angry, just quiet, calculating. Every mile of that base was being recorded in her mind, not as judgment but as responsibility. At the gate, she'd seen the problem surface. Here, she was beginning to see its roots. When the car stopped in front of Headquarters Building 1, the heat hit her like a wall. The air smelled faintly of motor oil and dust. A line of soldiers stood outside, their posture stiff but uneasy. The rumors had already spread. The new commander was a woman. She wasn't in uniform. She'd been stopped at the gate. She stepped out of the car, slow and composed, and returned every salute with mechanical precision. The moment she entered the building, her eyes began scanning, floors scuffed, paint peeling near the ceiling, the American flag displayed slightly off-center behind the reception desk. It wasn't neglect born of rebellion. It was neglect born of fatigue, and that was far more dangerous. She turned to the acting base commander, Colonel Richards, a man whose posture still carried traces of what Fort Henderson once was. "Colonel," she said quietly, "before I unpack a single bag, I want a full tour. Every department, every section. No filters, no prepared speeches. I want to see what's real." Richards blinked. "Ma'am, perhaps we could arrange a formal—" "Now." The tone wasn't harsh, it was simply final. They began with the training grounds. The smell of sweat and sand filled the air. A group of soldiers jogged past, talking more than breathing, their cadence uneven. The instructor shouted half-hearted commands, his voice lost in the wind. Sarah stopped walking. The soldiers glanced at her, then kept running. She turned to Major Harrison. "What are they training for?" He hesitated. "A routine morning PT, ma'am." Routine. Her gaze followed the group until they disappeared around the corner. There's nothing routine about losing your rhythm. Every exercise is a reflection of command presence. When leaders go soft, soldiers follow. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried. The nearby staff sergeant, overhearing, straightened instinctively. They continued, past the motor pool, where half the vehicles were lined up like tired beasts, several clearly out of service. Past the mess hall, where wrappers fluttered near the entrance, ignored by the men on break. Past the family housing area, where overgrown lawns whispered of a base too tired to care. Richards tried to explain. "Ma'am, we've been in maintenance backlog for months. Funding's delayed and—" Sarah stopped him with a glance. "Colonel, leadership doesn't depend on funding. It depends on standards." For a moment, no one spoke. When they reached headquarters again, she finally broke her silence. "Schedule a meeting with all department heads. Tomorrow, 800 sharp, every division. And this afternoon, I want to meet all senior enlisted personnel. No formalities, just an honest conversation." "Yes, ma'am." "And one more thing," she added. "Clean this building. Every wall, every flag, every inch. Not because I care about appearances, but because the people who walk through these doors need to remember where they are." Harrison nodded, understood. Sarah walked toward her new office. The door creaked when it opened, a sound that said everything about the state of things. Inside, dust covered the window ledge. A faded photograph of the previous commander still hung crooked behind the desk. She looked around, then placed her bag gently on the floor. "This will do," she whispered. Major Harrison lingered near the doorway. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely." "Granted." He hesitated, searching for words. Morale been low. The last co kept things running on paper but not in spirit. People stopped believing things could change. It's not that they don't care, they just stopped expecting better. Sarah nodded. When standards collapse, belief dies first, but belief can be rebuilt. "How?" She turned toward him, her eyes steady. "By proving that leadership isn't about punishment, it's about example." That afternoon, the senior enlisted briefing took place in a conference room that felt as worn as the rest of the base. The long table bore scratches from 1,000 coffee mugs and unspoken frustrations. Sergeant Major Thompson was the last to enter. His uniform was crisp, his eyes sharp, but there was fatigue there, the kind of fatigue that came from watching things fall apart slower than you could fix them. "Thank you for coming," Sarah began, standing rather than sitting. "I know I'm new here. You've heard things, read reports, maybe even formed opinions. That's fine. You'll have time to judge me by my actions. But before we talk about where we're going, we need to talk about where we are." She paused, letting the silence work for her. "This morning, I was stopped at your gate." A few heads turned. Thompson's jaw clenched slightly. He'd heard. Everyone had. The guards didn't salute. They didn't follow procedure. One even questioned my identity after confirmation from headquarters. A low murmur rippled through the room. Sarah continued. "That incident wasn't about disrespect. It was about disconnection. Somewhere between orders and understanding, this base lost the link between authority and purpose. And when that link breaks, everything else follows." She took a step closer to the table. "I don't care about embarrassment, I care about systems. If 2 guards could doubt their commanding officer at the front gate, what else are we missing? Communication, discipline, pride." No one answered. "I'm not here to hand out punishments," she said finally. I'm here to rebuild something worth serving under. That starts with you. Each of you represents the standard not through speeches but through presence. Soldiers don't rise to what we say, they rise to what we are." Thompson leaned forward slightly, his voice low but sincere. "Ma'am, with respect, we've had new commanders before. They come with big plans, but the base stays the same. What makes this time different?" Sarah met his gaze. "Because I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for accountability, and I'll hold myself to it first." A pause, then she added softer, "We'll make mistakes, but we won't hide them. We'll turn them into lessons just like I did this morning." The sergeant major studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Ma'am, I think we're ready for that." By nightfall, the base had started to shift, subtly, but noticeably. The lights in the main corridor of headquarters stayed on later than usual. 2 soldiers were seen repainting the chipped edges near the main door. The wrinkled flag at the gate was replaced and folded properly. Word traveled fast in places like Fort Henderson. The new commander didn't yell, she didn't punish, she just noticed. And that somehow was far more unsettling. In her office, Sarah sat by the window, watching the last rays of sun fade behind the distant hangars. The silence felt heavy, filled with the echoes of her own doubts. Was she ready for this? She'd rebuilt broken units before, but this was different. This wasn't a matter of tactics or training, it was spirit. She thought about the young private's face, the stubborn defiance fading into shame. It wasn't malice, it was ignorance, and ignorance could be taught. She remembered something her old mentor once told her. You don't fix a unit by shouting. You fix it by showing them what right looks like. She smiled faintly. Then that's what I'll do. Her phone buzzed, a message from Major Harrison. All department heads confirmed for 800. Staff already working late to prepare. Also, gate area cleaned. Flag replaced. She looked out at the base again. Somewhere out there, 2 guards were probably still replaying the morning in their minds, wondering if they still had a future here. They did. Because tomorrow, Sarah Martinez would make sure their mistake became the first lesson of a new chapter, not the last reminder of an old one. She leaned back, folded her arms, and whispered to the empty room. "This isn't a command, it's a rescue." The next morning began without ceremony, just the metallic hum of fluorescent lights flickering to life across the base. Sarah arrived early, long before her staff. She liked to see how a place behaved when no one thought they were being watched. The air smelled of dew and old motor oil. From her window, she could see a few soldiers jogging past the headquarters, some disciplined, others dragging their feet. The sound of half-hearted cadence echoed faintly, disorganized. She noted every detail, not to criticize but to understand. At 7:55 hours, the conference room filled one by one department heads, mid-level officers, and senior NCOs. The mood was cautious, a mix of curiosity and quiet apprehension. No one knew what to expect from this new commander, especially after the gate incident had spread like wildfire. By the time the clock struck 800, everyone was seated. Sarah entered without a word, a folder under her arm, her uniform pressed sharp as glass. For the first time since her arrival, she wore her rank openly. The silver eagle gleamed against her shoulder, a quiet announcement of authority that needed no introduction. She didn't sit right away. Instead, she let her gaze move slowly around the room, reading faces, body language, hesitation. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but carried to every corner. "Thank you for being here. I know the last few months have been difficult." No one moved. "Yesterday," she continued, "I toured this base. I saw good people, people trying, adapting, surviving. But I also saw fatigue, a kind of quiet surrender, the kind that creeps into a place when no one believes change is possible anymore." A murmur rippled through the room. not disagreement but recognition. Sarah placed her folder on the table. I'm not here to criticize, I'm here to rebuild, but rebuilding starts with honesty. She opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet, a list. These, she said, are findings from my initial walkthrough, some small, some serious. Her tone never sharpened, but her words carried weight. Training discipline inconsistent, maintenance backlogs unreported, communication gaps between departments, a lack of coordination in security drills, and perhaps most concerning, morale levels described as non-measurable in the last internal survey. She looked up, her expression unreadable. How did we get here? For a long moment, no one answered. Finally, Colonel Richards, still seated near the end of the table, cleared his throat. Ma'am, it began with instability at the top. When leadership kept changing, people stopped trusting decisions. Everyone started working in survival mode. Sarah nodded. Go on. Major Harrison added quietly, we've also had senior NCOs transfer out. The replacements came in without guidance or training. They filled roles but not responsibilities. Sergeant Major Thompson leaned forward, voice steady but heavy. And discipline slipped because no one wanted to be the bad guy anymore. Standards became optional. Sarah let the silence that followed stretch, the kind of silence that forced people to sit with their own truths. Then she said something none of them expected. Good, now that we know the problem, we can fix it. A few heads lifted. I don't believe in punishment for systemic failure, she continued. I believe in structure. If this base has forgotten its rhythm, we'll start by finding it again. She drew 3 words on the whiteboard. Communication, consistency, accountability. These are our new priorities, she said. Every department, every shift, every operation. Communication means everyone knows what's happening, from the commander to the cook. Consistency means we stop improvising our standards. Accountability means we own our results, the good and the bad. A captain at the far end of the table spoke hesitantly. Ma'am, we've had programs before. They start strong and fade out when things get busy. Sarah looked at him. That's because they were programs. I'm talking about culture. Programs end. Culture doesn't. Her tone softened. Change won't come from me barking orders. It'll come from you showing what right looks like. The sergeant major smiled faintly. Ma'am, that's not how most colonels start their first day. Sarah allowed a small smile. Then maybe that's why most bases don't change. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. By the end, the room no longer felt cautious, it felt charged. Assignments were given. Department heads were told to audit their teams. Maintenance schedules were reinstated. Daily accountability briefs were ordered at every level of command. When the meeting adjourned, several officers lingered, talking quietly among themselves. There was doubt still, but also something else beginning to form. Hope. Later that morning, Sarah stepped outside into the dry air. She wanted to see the base not from behind a desk, but from the ground among the people who actually carried it. She began her inspection at the motor pool. The scent of fuel and rubber filled the hangar. Engines sat open like surgery patients. A few mechanics were working, but several stood around a toolbox, half working, half talking. When they saw her, their conversation stopped cold. Ma'am, one of them hurried to salute. Sarah nodded, at ease just observing. She walked past the vehicle slowly, nodding oil leaks, missing labels, open panels left unattended. Then she stopped near a Humvee that looked like it hadn't moved in weeks. Who's responsible for this vehicle? She asked quietly. A corporal raised his hand hesitantly. Ma'am, it's mine. Been waiting on a part order for 2 months, she finished for him, pointing to the inspection tag, and no follow-up since. He looked down. No, ma'am. Sarah knelt slightly, checking the undercarriage herself. What happens when a part order gets delayed? He blinked. Usually we just wait, ma'am. That's the problem, she said, standing again. Waiting becomes a habit. From now on, if a delay lasts more than 2 weeks, you report it up the chain directly. We fix what we can, and if we can't, we escalate. She turned to the rest of them. A vehicle isn't just metal, it's readiness, and readiness isn't optional. No anger, no lecture, just clarity. By the time she left the motor pool, conversations had already started. The corporal was scribbling notes. Someone was cleaning tools. It wasn't fear that moved them, it was awareness. Her next stop was the dining facility. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and scrambled eggs. Soldiers moved through the line in silence, heads low, eyes tired. Sarah didn't announce herself. She picked up a tray, got in line, and waited just another customer. When she sat down, the soldiers around her glanced, recognized her, then quickly looked away. She spoke anyway. "How's the food?" A young specialist blinked. It's fine, ma'am." "You don't sound convinced." He hesitated, then smiled nervously. "It's edible, ma'am." A few soldiers nearby chuckled. Sarah smiled too. "Honest answer, that's a start." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me something. What's the one thing you change here if you could?" The specialist looked at his tray. "The menu, it never changes. Same meals, same schedule. You stop eating for taste, just out of habit." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Habit is dangerous. It kills morale faster than hunger. When she finished eating, she walked straight into the kitchen. The staff froze mid-motion. "Relax," she said, smiling. "I'm not here to inspect, I'm here to listen." She spent 15 minutes talking with the cooks, asking about supply issues, schedules, and morale. By the end, the tension in the room had melted into cautious optimism. That evening, she met again with Major Harrison and Sergeant Major Thompson. Harrison looked exhausted but encouraged. "Ma'am, word spreading fast. Troops are saying you've been everywhere, the motor pool, mess hall, barracks. People are surprised." "Good," Sarah said. "Surprise is the first step toward awareness." Thompson folded his arms. "If I may, ma'am, some are still skeptical. They've seen change talked about before but never lived through it." "Then we'll make them live through it," she replied. Her tone softened again. "Not by orders, by example." Thompson smiled faintly. "You're not like the others, are you?" Sarah shook her head. "No, but I've failed before. I know what it costs when you lose a team's trust. You don't rebuild it by shouting. You rebuild it by showing them you see them." She looked toward the window, the night settling outside like a heavy blanket over the base. "Every soldier here has a story behind the fatigue. We'll find them one by one and remind them why they joined." Harrison tilted his head. "And what about the ones who have stopped believing?" She turned back to him. "Then we'll believe enough for both of us until they catch up." Later, alone in her office, she wrote a single line in her notebook before turning off the light. "Leadership doesn't start with power, it starts with presence." The words hung in the stillness like a quiet oath. Outside, the base was finally quiet. For the first time in a long time, Fort Henderson felt like it was breathing again, cautiously, but alive. And as Colonel Sarah Martinez closed her eyes that night, one thought followed her into sleep. The hardest battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought against the slow decay of purpose. The first cracks appeared not outside, but within. 2 weeks into her command, Fort Henderson was cleaner, sharper, quieter. Orders were being followed. Reports came in on time. Uniforms looked tighter. Even morning formations had regained a faint rhythm. But beneath the surface, something was building. Change always stirs resistance, especially from those who have survived long enough to get comfortable with dysfunction. It began in whispers. "She's trying too hard. It's all show, it won't last. She's turning this place into a schoolhouse." Sarah had heard it all before at other commands in other lives. She didn't take it personally. Resistance wasn't rebellion. It was fear disguised as cynicism. Still, she knew fear could be contagious if left unchecked. So when Sergeant Major Thompson mentioned that some senior staff were quietly questioning her hands-on approach, she didn't get angry. She asked for a meeting. Not in the conference room. Not behind closed doors. She held it outside, in the open air, under the flag that now flew clean and bright against the morning sky. Every officer, every senior NCO was there. Some stood with practiced posture, others with crossed arms, waiting. Sarah walked to the center of the field and stopped. She didn't need a microphone. Her presence was enough. 2 weeks ago, she began, I told you that rebuilding this base would start with honesty. That means honesty goes both ways. I've heard the talk. Some of you think this is all for appearances. Some think the standards I'm enforcing are unnecessary. Some think I'm too involved. A few eyes dropped, a few didn't. She continued, her voice calm, deliberate. You're right about one thing, I am involved. Because leadership is not an office, it's a mirror. If I ask soldiers to care, I must care first. If I ask them to show discipline, I must live it, every day. She paused, scanning the crowd. Fort Henderson doesn't need more rules. It needs belief. And belief doesn't come from memos, it comes from example. Silence followed. Then one officer, Captain Drexler, Logistics, spoke up. Ma'am, with respect, some of us have been here long enough to know that enthusiasm fades. We've had commanders make speeches before. Things improve for a month, then fall apart again. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. You're right, she said softly. Enthusiasm fades, but habits stay. That's why we're building habits, not speeches. He frowned. And what if soldiers resist those habits? She smiled faintly. Then we keep showing them what right looks like, until they forget what wrong looked like. Thompson's mouth twitched into the smallest grin. It wasn't defiance, it was respect. The captain nodded slowly, almost grudgingly. Understood, ma'am. Sarah looked around once more. This base isn't being rebuilt for inspection reports or headlines. It's being rebuilt because every one of you deserves to serve somewhere you can be proud of. Her gaze softened. If that's not why you're here, you'll find transfer papers ready by the end of the week. Nobody moved. Good, she thought. Let silence do the work. That afternoon, as sunlight broke through the cloud cover, she walked the perimeter of the base alone, a habit she developed years ago to think, to listen, to see what others didn't say out loud. At the far edge of the training fields, she noticed two soldiers arguing quietly beside a supply truck. One of them, Specialist Green, stood defensive, arms folded. The other, Sergeant Willis, looked frustrated, pointing toward a clipboard. Sarah approached without a word. Both froze immediately. Ma'am, Willis said, snapping to attention. Just a misunderstanding, ma'am. Misunderstanding about what? Sarah asked. Green swallowed. Paperwork, ma'am. I logged the fuel delivery but didn't file it under the new format yet. Sarah took the clipboard from Willis and scanned it. The handwriting was rushed, the form half complete. How long have you known about the new reporting standard? Green hesitated. About a week, ma'am. And why didn't you follow it? He hesitated again, searching for words that wouldn't sound like excuses. Honestly, ma'am, I didn't think it mattered. Sarah handed the clipboard back. Everything matters, Specialist. Every unchecked box, every unread memo, every unfiled report. The moment you decide something small doesn't matter, that's the moment standards start to die. Her tone wasn't angry, it was tired. The soldier nodded, eyes downcast. Understood, ma'am. She softened. Good, because you're not in trouble, you're just reminded. By the end of the week, small signs of progress had become visible. The motor pool's backlog was shrinking. The mess hall had a rotating menu, something no one thought possible. Soldiers were saluting more crisply. Training attendance was up. But with progress came something else, scrutiny. Colonel Richards, still wrapping up his transition before leaving for his new post, came to see her late one evening. He stood at her office door, hat in hand. "Ma'am, may I?" "Of course." He stepped inside, glancing around. "Word's getting out, you know. Henderson's changing. The Pentagon's starting to notice." Sarah didn't look up from her paperwork. "Let them." He hesitated. "I just want to caution you, ma'am. Change draws attention, and not all of it good. Some people prefer quiet failures to loud reform." Now she looked up. "You think I should slow down?" "I think you should be careful. You've built a lot of momentum fast. Some senior officers do like when things move without their permission." Sarah smiled faintly. "Permission isn't leadership, Colonel. Responsibility is." He chuckled softly. "You remind me of myself 20 years ago. I wish I'd had your courage then." She shook her head. "Courage isn't the hard part. Endurance is." The endurance test came sooner than expected. 3 days later, a training accident rattled the base. A convoy returning from a field exercise collided with a supply truck near the north gate. No fatalities, but 3 soldiers were injured, one seriously. Within minutes, the air on base turned heavy. Sirens, medics, chaos. Sarah arrived at the scene within 10 minutes. The first thing she saw was confusion, soldiers shouting, vehicles blocking lanes, no clear command presence. She stepped out of the jeep, and her voice sliced through the noise. Everyone stopped talking and moved. Heads turned instantly. She pointed to the nearest NCO. "You secure a perimeter, no vehicles in or out." Another, "Get me the medic lead now." And to a third, "Where the duty officer?" No one answered. That told her everything. When order finally returned, Sarah walked the scene herself. The injured were being treated. The wrecked vehicles smoked quietly. Major Harrison approached, pale and shaken. "Ma'am, preliminary report says driver error. Fatigue, possibly. The convoy was running overtime. Someone extended drills without notifying ops." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Who authorized that?" He hesitated. "Captain Drexler, ma'am, logistics lead." She closed her eyes briefly, not in anger but in disappointment. "Find him," she said quietly. An hour later, Drexler stood before her in the operations room, shoulders tense. "Captain," she began evenly, "why did your convoy run 4 hours past schedule without notifying command?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, we were behind. I didn't want to cancel the last leg, I thought." "You thought you'd push through?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am, we needed to finish the run." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her voice low but sharp. "At what cost, Captain? 3 soldiers are in the medical bay tonight because you thought finishing mattered more than following protocol." His eyes dropped. "I take full responsibility, ma'am." "I know you do," she said. "But this isn't just about fault. It's about culture. You're not the only one who's been trained to think that results justify risk. That's the disease we're curing here." She paced slowly, the weight of her words pressing into the silence. "Discipline doesn't mean perfection. It means knowing when to stop, when to say enough." He nodded quietly. "Understood, ma'am." "Good," she said. "Then you'll brief your entire company tomorrow. You'll tell them exactly what happened and what you learned. No cover-ups, no excuses." He blinked, startled. "Ma'am, you want me to admit fault in front of everyone?" "Yes, because accountability only matters when it's visible." That evening, after the reports were filed and the noise settled, Sarah stood outside the medical bay. Through the glass, she watched one of the injured soldiers sleeping, arm in a sling, face bruised but peaceful. Thompson approached quietly. "They'll recover," he said. "Could have been worse." Sarah nodded. "It wasn't just an accident, Sergeant Major. It was a message." He frowned. "A message?" "Complacency always fights back before it dies," she said softly. "Today was the fight." He looked at her for a long moment, then asked, "You think you're winning?" She smiled faintly. Not yet, but we're close enough to make the old ways nervous. Thompson chuckled. You're something else, ma'am. No, she said, her gaze still on the injured soldier. I'm just stubborn enough to believe people can change. The wind shifted, tugging the flag above the bay. Its folds snapped clean against the night. And for the first time since her arrival, Fort Henderson felt less like a burden and more like a heartbeat. The inspection team arrived unannounced. 3 black SUVs rolled through the gate just after sunrise, their tinted windows catching the first gold of morning. The guards at the checkpoint, crisp uniforms, clean boots, alert eyes, snapped to attention. It was a perfect reflection of the change Fort Henderson had undergone in just 6 weeks. But Sarah didn't smile when she saw the vehicles from her office window. Unannounced visits never carried good news. Pentagon oversight, Major Harrison said as he entered her office, already looking uneasy. Advanced team says they're here to evaluate readiness and leadership practices. Sarah looked up from her desk. Evaluate or investigate? Harrison hesitated. Both, maybe. Word's been spreading about your reforms, about the gate incident. Apparently, some people upstairs think you're unconventional. Sarah leaned back, expression unreadable. Unconventional is what they call it when a woman does something effective. Thompson, standing near the doorway, let out a low chuckle. You want me to prep the base, ma'am? She shook her head. No, no polishing, no rehearsals. They'll see Fort Henderson as it is, clean, disciplined, and honest. That's enough. She stood, adjusted her collar, and walked out. Let's go meet our visitors. The inspection team was led by Brigadier General Malcolm Trent, a man who wore authority like armor, pressed, polished, and unbending. He was old-school military through and through, with a voice that could slice through glass and an expression that suggested he'd never once been impressed in his life. Colonel Martinez, he said, offering a curt nod as she approached. I trust you're aware of our purpose here. Only in general terms, sir, she replied evenly, but I'm sure you'll clarify. He gestured toward his team, 3 officers with clipboards and neutral expressions. Fort Henderson has been on our watch list for nearly 2 years. Low morale, poor retention, substandard readiness. Recent reports indicate drastic improvement. Sarah folded her arms. That's correct, sir. Trent's eyes narrowed. Too drastic, some might say. The statement hung in the air. Rapid change raises questions, he continued. We're here to determine whether the numbers reflect sustainable improvement or creative accounting. Sarah didn't flinch. You'll find no creative accounting here, sir, just accountability. He studied her for a long moment. We'll see. The inspection began. Trent and his officers moved through the base with mechanical precision, clipboards in hand, pens scratching like needles. Every facility was visited. The barracks, the motor pool, the training fields. And everywhere they went, the same thing greeted them: order, cleanliness, soldiers who stood taller when spoken to. At the gate, Specialist Johnson saluted sharply as they passed. His once wrinkled uniform was immaculate, his voice confident. Morning, sir. Security protocols current, all systems operational. Trent stopped, studying him. How long have you been assigned here, Specialist? Since before Colonel Martinez's arrival, sir. And how have things changed since then? Johnson hesitated, then spoke with simple pride. We started caring again, sir. The general blinked, almost surprised by the sincerity. Then he nodded curtly and moved on. Sarah, standing a few paces behind, allowed herself the smallest breath of pride. The next stop was the training field. Dozens of soldiers were running a combat simulation, movement crisp, communication sharp. The field buzzed with energy. Trent watched silently, arms crossed. Not bad, he muttered, almost too polished. Sarah stepped forward. It's not polish, sir, it's practice. He shot her a look. You've done all this in 6 weeks. With help, she said simply, and belief. He frowned. Belief isn't measurable. No, sir, Sarah replied softly, but failure is. For the first time, Trent had no immediate answer. That afternoon, they gathered in the main briefing room. Stacks of reports lay on the table, readiness data, maintenance records, personnel files. Everything Trent had requested. He flipped through them methodically, his expression unreadable. After a while he said, "Your retention rates have increased by 15%, training scores up 20, operational efficiency up 33. Impressive numbers, Colonel." "Thank you, sir." He looked up, "But numbers can't tell me how you did it." Sarah clasped her hands behind her back. "By treating soldiers like people, sir, not statistics, by making them part of the solution instead of the problem." Trent leaned back in his chair, studying her. "That's not how military leadership usually works." "I'm aware," she said. "That's why most bases don't change." He raised an eyebrow. "You're confident, Colonel." "Confident," she said, "or convicted?" A long silence followed. Finally, Trent set the papers down. "I've also read about your incident at the gate, the one that started all this. You handled it unconventionally." Sarah nodded. "Those soldiers made mistakes, sir, but they were symptoms, not the disease. The problem wasn't defiance, it was disconnection. I corrected it. By promoting them. By teaching them," she said. "Punishment creates compliance. Education creates understanding. I wanted them to learn, not fear." One of the officers beside Trent murmured quietly, "She's not wrong, sir." Trent gave him a sharp look, then turned back to Sarah. "You took a risk." "Yes, sir," she said, "but leadership is risk. Without it, nothing changes." He stood slowly, walking to the window. The base stretched out beyond the glass, clean, active, alive. "When I was your age," he said finally, "I ran a unit the traditional way. Discipline, punishment, repetition. It worked for a while. Then the cracks appeared. You're telling me you found another way?" Sarah stepped closer. "Not another way, sir, the original way. Lead by example, teach through respect. Expect excellence because you show it first." He turned, meeting her eyes for the first time without skepticism. "You believe that's enough to keep this momentum?" "Yes, sir, because they believe now too." He studied her for a long moment, then gave a short nod. "We'll finish the review tomorrow." That night, Sarah stayed in her office long after dark. The base was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional footsteps in the hallway. Her desk was covered in reports, memos, and charts. But her mind wasn't on numbers, it was on people. She thought about Johnson, the private who had once defied her. About Sergeant Williams, now training new guards in proper protocol. About Captain Drexler, who had stood before his unit after the accident and owned his failure in front of everyone and earned their respect for it. Progress, she thought, isn't built in meetings, it's built in moments. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter." Sergeant Major Thompson stepped in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Figured you could use one, ma'am." She smiled. "You're a lifesaver." He handed her a mug, then sat across from her. "You think the general's buying it?" Sarah leaned back, sipping slowly. "He's not supposed to buy it, he's supposed to see it, and he has." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "You know, the troops are talking. They say they've never seen a commander walk among them like you do. They respect you." She smiled faintly. "Respect isn't what I'm after, Sergeant Major. Ownership is. The day they take pride in this base without needing me to remind them, that's the day I'll know we've succeeded." Thompson tilted his head, "And after that?" She looked out the window at the glowing lights of Fort Henderson. "After that, it won't matter if I'm here or not, because the base will remember what it feels like to believe again." The next morning, the inspection concluded. Trent stood on the headquarters steps, his team beside him. "Colonel Martinez," he said, "your leadership methods are unconventional, but effective. Sarah waited, saying nothing. He continued, Fort Henderson's readiness rating will be officially upgraded from conditional to excellent. Your personnel programs will be recommended for adoption at other installations. A quiet murmur rippled through the small crowd gathered nearby. Then Trent added, his voice lower, You've done something rare here, Colonel. You've reminded me what command used to mean. Sarah saluted, Thank you, sir. He returned it crisply, Carry on. As the SUVs pulled away, Thompson looked at her, grinning. You just turned the Pentagon's watchdog into a believer. Sarah smiled softly. No, I just reminded him that leadership isn't about control, it's about care. That evening, the base gathered at sunset. No orders, no formation, just soldiers standing outside, watching as the flag was lowered in the fading light. Specialist Johnson was the one holding the rope, his hands steady, his eyes proud. Sarah stood off to the side, silent. For the first time since arriving, she didn't feel like she was commanding a base. She felt like she was part of a living, breathing family, one that had rediscovered its heartbeat. And as the flag folded into perfect corners, she whispered to herself, Respect isn't given by rank, it's earned in silence. The call came just after midnight. A single, sharp ring on the secure line, the kind that wakes you before you know why. Sarah was at her desk, half asleep over a stack of readiness reports when she answered. Colonel Martinez. The voice on the other end was tight, urgent. Ma'am, this is Sergeant Lewis at Command Ops. We've got a situation at the east perimeter. Sarah was already standing. What kind of situation? Unidentified breach, ma'am. Motion sensors tripped twice near the vehicle depot. Could be wildlife, but you don't think so, she finished. No, ma'am, we found tire tracks leading toward the outer fence, not ours. Her tone hardened. Lock down that sector, I'm on my way. She hung up, grabbed her jacket, and was out the door in less than 60 seconds. The night was cool, silent, too silent. The kind of stillness that makes every sound feel magnified. As Sarah's Jeep approached the east perimeter, floodlights sliced through the dark, casting long, sharp shadows across the ground. A cluster of soldiers stood near the wire fence, their flashlights cutting nervous circles in the dirt. Major Harrison met her halfway, his face pale in the glare. Perimeter alarms went off twice, ma'am, he reported. East sector near the maintenance depot, we found these. He held out a small bag. Inside were 2 crushed cigarette butts, still fresh. Civilians, she asked. Maybe, or someone testing the fence line. Sarah's mind began mapping possibilities, trespasser, smuggler, or recon. None of them acceptable. Any sign of entry? Not yet, ma'am, but there's a cut in the outer wire, small, clean, professional. That word, professional, sent a ripple of unease through her chest. She walked to the breach herself, crouching low. The wire had been clipped precisely, without fraying like a surgeon's incision. No amateur did this. How far's the depot? She asked quietly. About 300 meters, ma'am. Show me. The convoy moved in silence. Only the crunch of boots and distant hum of generators broke the stillness. As they neared the depot, Sarah raised her hand, a silent signal to halt. Something didn't feel right. Her eyes scanned the horizon, shadows, vehicles, containers stacked like sleeping giants. The air smelled faintly of diesel and something else. Burnt plastic. She turned sharply. Do you smell that? Thompson nodded. Electrical fire, maybe. Or a diversion, she murmured. Before anyone could respond, a sharp crack split the air, a single, echoing pop. Not a gunshot, a detonation. An explosion flared near the far corner of the depot, small but deliberate, enough to ignite panic. Contact, someone shouted. Chaos erupted, lights flashing, alarms blaring. Soldiers moved instinctively, ducking, shouting orders. Sarah grabbed her radio. All units, East Depot under potential attack. Secure perimeter and hold position. No return fire until confirmed threat. Her voice cut through the noise like steel. Major Harrison, get me eyes on that explosion site. Already deploying drones, ma'am. She turned to Thompson. Evacuate non-essential personnel. I want medical on standby and EOD checking for secondary devices. He nodded and moved. For several tense minutes, the night was alive with motion, soldiers running, floodlights sweeping the fields, radios crackling with clipped urgency. Sarah's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. No one fires unless I say so. We don't lose control tonight. 15 minutes later, the first report came in. Ma'am, we've got visual from the drone. Explosion was localized, small incendiary device placed under a fuel container. No major damage, no casualties. Sarah exhaled slowly. Was it inside the fence? Yes, ma'am. She turned to Harrison. Then someone was inside. The realization cut through the air like cold wind. How the hell did they get past the cameras? He muttered. Sarah didn't answer right away. She looked toward the dark horizon, the breach, the tracks, the clean cut in the fence. This wasn't random. Someone had planned this. Someone testing them or warning them. She spoke quietly, but her tone left no room for doubt. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted us to know we weren't untouchable. The investigation stretched into dawn. By sunrise, they'd collected fragments from the blast, small, controlled, military grade. The kind of device that required training to make. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Sarah stood outside the depot as the first light hit the horizon, painting the smoke in muted orange. Her uniform was streaked with dust, her face tired but sharp. Thompson approached, holding a tablet. EOD confirms it was a shaped incendiary, timer-based. No remote trigger, could have been worse. Could have, she agreed. But it wasn't meant to destroy, it was meant to remind. He frowned. Remind us of what? That discipline isn't the same as security, she said softly. We fixed morale, now we fix defense. Later that morning, she gathered her staff in the operations room. The mood was grim, tension thick as humidity. Sarah stood at the front, sleeves rolled, eyes steady. Last night wasn't an accident, it was a message and a test. Someone wanted to know how fast we'd respond, and they got their answer. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We did not panic, we did not overreact. We followed procedure and contained the threat. That means we passed. Major Harrison exhaled, tension easing slightly. Still, ma'am, we've got a breach to explain. Yes, Sarah said, which means this isn't the end of the test, it's the beginning. She turned to Thompson. I want a full security overhaul. Perimeter patrol schedules randomized, entry points reinforced, cameras recalibrated, and every guard trained on new protocols by week's end. Understood, ma'am. Then she looked at Johnson, the same young guard who had once refused to let her through the gate. Specialist, she said, you're now in charge of redesigning the front gate response drill. I want you to work with EOD and base intel. Build something strong enough that if last night happens again, we're ready. His eyes widened. Ma'am, me. Yes, you. You learned the hard way what happens when we assume instead of confirm. I trust you not to repeat that. He straightened, pride shining through the shock. Understood, ma'am, you won't regret it. I know I won't. For the next 72 hours, Fort Henderson moved like a living organism under stress. Fast, focused, alert. Patrols doubled, training intensified. Coordination between departments tightened like never before. Soldiers worked late without complaint. But Sarah wasn't celebrating. Something about the attack bothered her, its precision, its timing, its restraint. Whoever had done it didn't want chaos. They wanted attention. And they had hers. Late one night, As she reviewed the latest reports, she noticed a detail buried in the logs. 2 supply shipments marked delayed, both rerouted through civilian contractors 3 weeks earlier. Civilian access. Her mind clicked through the pattern the fence cut, the fuel depot, the placement of the device. This wasn't about Fort Henderson being weak. It was about someone testing its strength from within. She called Harrison immediately. "I want background checks on every civilian contractor who's been on base since my arrival. Vendors, maintenance, deliveries, all of them." "Yes, ma'am." "And Harrison." "Ma'am." "Don't tell anyone else yet, not until we know." By the end of the week, the report came in. One name stood out: Evan Riker, former supply technician, dishonorably discharged 5 years ago for theft of military materials. Last known employment: subcontracted maintenance crew, Fort Henderson Fuel Depot. Sarah stared at the file. The puzzle clicked into place. He hadn't just snuck in, he'd been let in. Her voice was cold when she spoke. "Get base security and MPs. We're picking him up." The arrest happened quietly, no drama, no sirens. Riker was found in a nearby town, working at a small repair shop. When confronted, he didn't resist. "Didn't think you'd find me that fast," he said, half smiling as he was cuffed. Sarah stood before him, eyes steady. "You worked here once, you knew our routines." "Yeah," he said. "Used to be a joke of a base. Thought I'd make a little noise, see if it still was." "And?" she asked softly. He smiled bitterly. "Guess not anymore." That night, as the base returned to calm, Sarah walked alone along the perimeter. The wire fence, now repaired and gleaming under the lights, stretched endlessly into the dark. The air was still again, but this time the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. She stopped, staring at the stars above the flagpole. For weeks, she had been rebuilding discipline, trust, and pride. Last night, she'd learned something deeper: that leadership isn't tested when things go wrong. It's tested when you keep everyone calm enough to fix them. Thompson found her there, hands in his pockets. "Base is secure again, ma'am. Word spreading. You handled that like it was nothing." Sarah smiled faintly. "It wasn't nothing, Sergeant Major. It was everything." He nodded slowly. "You think this is the last of it?" She looked back at the fence. "No, but I think we're ready for whatever's next." The flag above them caught a gust of wind, snapping once, clear and sharp in the night. And in that sound, Fort Henderson's new heartbeat returned, steady, disciplined, alive. The report came in just after dawn, stamped, classified, and wrapped in silence. Sarah read it twice before speaking a word. When she finally did, her voice was calm, but her pulse was. "Transfer orders," she said softly. Major Harrison looked at her across the desk, brow furrowed. "Ma'am, they're transferring 30 of our personnel to another base, immediately." Thompson, standing by the window, turned sharply. 30, that's half our operations team." "Not just any 30, she said, sliding the papers toward him. "They're taking the same soldiers who rebuilt this place. The ones leading the new training programs, the gate reform, the maintenance overhaul, all of them." Harrison scanned the list. "That can't be coincidence." "It's not," Sarah replied. "They want what we built here somewhere else." She leaned back, hands clasped, eyes distant. "The Pentagon's repurposing our people to assist struggling bases." Translation: they want to copy the system without understanding it. Thompson exhaled heavily. "They'll break it. Pulling this many leaders out at once will tear morale apart." "Exactly," she said quietly, "and that's what they don't see." The rest of the morning passed like smoke. Meetings, phone calls, questions without answers. By noon, the orders were confirmed. Transfers to begin in 48 hours. Sarah knew she couldn't stop the paperwork, not directly, but she also knew what she could control: how her people faced it. She gathered the 30 soldiers in the old hangar. the same space that had once been filled with broken vehicles and forgotten equipment. Now, sunlight streamed through clean glass, illuminating rows of soldiers standing tall and proud. She looked at them, young faces, older faces, all carrying the same look of quiet worry. "I know you've all heard," she began. "You're being reassigned." A murmur rippled through the group, frustration, disbelief, anger. Sarah held up a hand. "I want to be clear. This isn't punishment, it's recognition. You're being asked to bring what we've built here to other commands." A soldier in the front row, Specialist Johnson, spoke up. "Ma'am, with respect, we don't want to go. This is our home now." Sarah felt the sting of his words. "I know, but home isn't a place. It's the standard you carry with you. And what we've done here can't stay here, it has to spread." Thompson, standing to her side, added quietly, "You're being chosen because you made this base worth believing in again. Don't think of it as leaving, think of it as multiplying." It didn't erase the pain, but it softened it. Sarah stepped forward, voice low, heartfelt. "I can't stop these orders, but I can promise you this: every place you go will be stronger because of you. That's what leadership means. You don't hold on to excellence. You share it." There was silence, then, one by one, the soldiers nodded. When the meeting ended, no one rushed out. They lingered, as if unwilling to leave the moment. The kind of silence that carried both pride and grief. That night, Sarah stayed late in her office again. The base was quiet, the halls dark except for the faint light under her door. On her desk lay 2 letters, one official, one personal. The official letter was from General Trent. "Your leadership program has drawn attention across multiple commands. The Pentagon intends to model similar systems based on Fort Henderson's success. Further assignments may be forthcoming." The personal letter was from a former commander she had served under years ago, a mentor who'd once told her that leadership always comes with a price. She ran a hand over the paper, whispering to herself, "The price is always people." Her door opened quietly. It was Thompson, no salute this time, just presence. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, ma'am, been thinking about those kids." "Me too." He sat across from her. "You could fight this, you know, make calls, pull strings." Sarah smiled faintly. "Maybe. But if I fight for them to stay, I'd be fighting against the very thing I taught them, that good leadership doesn't belong to one place." Thompson looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "You realize you're sending away the heart of this base?" She nodded. "That's the point. If we've done our job right, the heart will keep beating wherever it goes." He chuckled quietly. "You always did think like a teacher." "Not a teacher," she said. "Just someone who remembers being lost once." The next day, the transfer trucks lined up outside the headquarters. The morning was bright, wind whipping gently through the flag. Sarah stood at the front gate, the same gate where it had all begun. Private Johnson, now Specialist Johnson, approached her with his duffel slung over his shoulder. He stopped, saluted sharply. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Granted." He took a breath. "I was the idiot who didn't let you onto this base. Thought I knew what leadership looked like. I didn't. You taught me that respect isn't in the salute, it's in the follow-through. I just wanted to say thank you." Sarah smiled, eyes bright. "No, Specialist. Thank you. You reminded me that leadership begins the moment someone doubts you, and you prove them wrong by example." He nodded, eyes glistening. "We'll make you proud, ma'am." "You already have." As the trucks began to roll out, Sarah watched them go, one after another, each carrying not just soldiers, but the future she'd built. When the last truck disappeared beyond the gate, she felt a hollow ache deep in her chest. Fort Henderson felt quieter now, too quiet, but it was the kind of silence that follows growth, not loss. That evening, Harrison found her sitting alone on the steps of headquarters. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked softly. Sarah didn't look up. Every leader says they want to make a difference. They never tell you it hurts this much when you actually do. He sat beside her, the two of them watching the last traces of sunset fade over the horizon. Fort Henderson's not the same without them, he said. It's not supposed to be, she replied. If it were, they'd have learned nothing. He nodded slowly. You think the Pentagon will ever understand what you did here? Sarah smiled faintly. They don't need to, the soldiers do, that's enough. For a while neither spoke. The flag fluttered quietly in the twilight. Then Sarah said, almost to herself, you know what my father used to say? He said real command isn't about giving orders. It's about giving people the strength to act right when you're not there to tell them to. Harrison nodded. Sounds like he'd be proud of you. She looked up at the flag. I hope so. Days turned into weeks. The base adjusted, slower, quieter, but stable. The soldiers who remained began mentoring new arrivals. Systems stayed in place. Standards held. Sarah had proven what she'd come to prove. That leadership once built didn't vanish when the leader stepped away. It multiplied. But one night, as she reviewed a new batch of transfer reports, she paused over a familiar name, Johnson, now listed as training lead for another base. Attached was a small note from his new commander. Specialist Johnson demonstrates remarkable initiative and discipline. He credits a Colonel Martinez from Fort Henderson. Whatever you did there, Colonel, it worked. Sarah smiled, setting the paper aside. For the first time in months, she leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and let herself breathe. The work wasn't finished. It never would be. But Fort Henderson and every life that had passed through it would carry her lessons forward. She whispered into the quiet, sometimes leadership isn't staying in command. It's teaching others how to lead when you're gone. That night, as the flag lowered outside her window, the wind caught it just right, and for a fleeting moment, it sounded like applause. It was raining the morning she received her reassignment orders. Not a storm, just a soft, steady drizzle that washed the dust off Fort Henderson's concrete roads and turned the air crisp with the smell of wet earth. Sarah stood by the window of her office, watching the rain trace slow paths down the glass. The paper in her hand was brief, 2 paragraphs that ended 3 years of rebuilding, reforming, and restoring faith. She'd been ordered to take command of a joint operations task force overseas. A promotion, technically, a recognition of success. But the word that echoed in her head wasn't promotion, it was departure. The knock on the door was gentle. "Come in," she said softly. Sergeant Major Thompson entered, already knowing. "So, it's official, huh?" She turned, holding the paper loosely. "It's official." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "They're sending you to bigger things." Sarah smiled faintly. "Bigger isn't always better, Sergeant Major. Sometimes it's just farther away." He chuckled quietly. "You're gonna miss this place." She looked around the office, the maps, the photos, the coffee stains that had long since become part of the desk. "This place saved me as much as I saved it." Later that morning, she walked the base one last time. Every building, every corner held a story, small, ordinary moments stitched together into something extraordinary. The motor pool still smelled faintly of oil and effort. She paused by the old depot, now spotless, its walls repainted, its lights bright. It was there that she'd once crouched beside a blast crater and realized the difference between control and calm. Then she moved on to the training fields, where laughter now mixed with commands. Soldiers ran in rhythm, their shouts confident, sharp. At the mess hall, she found new recruits sitting with senior NCOs, a sight that once would have been unthinkable. Now it was normal. She passed by the barracks, where a mural had been painted on the outer wall. A large eagle in flight, wings spread wide over the base motto below it. Discipline, dignity, belief. She stopped to stare at it. The paint was still fresh, the edges clean. Private tours did that, said a voice beside her. Sarah turned. It was Major Harrison. She said it was her way of saying thank you, he continued. She was one of the ones who almost quit last year. You talked her out of it. Sarah smiled softly. I didn't talk her out of it. I just reminded her why she joined. Harrison nodded. The board's holding a ceremony this evening. The soldiers, they wanted to do something before you go. She sighed, smiling. I told them no ceremonies. He shrugged. You told soldiers who look up to you not to honor you. You really think that was gonna work? By sunset, the rain had cleared. The parade ground glowed under the amber light, reflecting the fading colors of the sky. A soft wind carried the smell of grass and oil, and the faint murmur of anticipation. Hundreds of soldiers stood assembled, crisp uniforms, perfect lines, eyes forward. When Sarah stepped onto the platform, the sound of boots striking pavement rolled across the field like thunder. For a long moment she said nothing. She just really looked at the faces before her. The young, the weary, the proud. The ones who had once doubted her. The ones who now followed her without question. When she finally spoke, her voice carried easily across the field. When I arrived here, this base was broken. Not because of its buildings or its equipment, but because its people had forgotten what they were capable of. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the ranks. You changed that. You brought this place back to life. You proved that leadership doesn't come from rank or reputation. It comes from consistency, from care, and from courage when no one's watching. Her voice softened. Some of you will go on to lead other commands. Some will stay and continue the work we began. Either way, remember this: greatness doesn't announce itself. It just does the right thing quietly, over and over, until the world notices. She took a breath, her tone steady but full of emotion. I've been called many things in my career: officer, pilot, instructor, commander. But the title that means the most to me is yours. Her eyes glistened. You called me ma'am, and that word, that simple word, reminded me that respect isn't demanded. It's earned every single day. Silence fell. Then, like a wave, every soldier raised their right hand to salute. Hundreds of salutes. Perfectly timed, perfectly still. Sarah didn't salute back right away. She let the moment breathe, long enough for every soldier to know that this wasn't a goodbye. It was a continuation. When she finally returned the salute, the sun had dipped low enough to catch her in gold light, and for a second, the entire parade ground seemed to glow. After the ceremony, she walked alone one last time to the front gate. The same gate where it had all begun, where two nervous guards had once refused to let her in. The guard on duty now, young, fresh-faced, nervous, straightened instantly when he saw her. Ma'am, permission to. She held up a hand, smiling. At ease, soldier, just passing through. He nodded quickly, eyes wide with respect. As she approached the checkpoint, she glanced at the sign beside the gate. Once faded and rusted, it now gleamed with fresh paint. It read, Fort Henderson, where standards begin. She touched the sign lightly, her fingers leaving small droplets from the mist still clinging to the air. Then she turned, taking in the base one last time, the lights, the order, the quiet hum of movement. It was alive. Thompson found her there again. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, both of them watching the horizon turn violet. Finally, he said, hard to believe this was the same place that almost shut down 2 years ago. Sarah nodded. Harder to believe it was saved by the people everyone stopped believing in. He smiled faintly. They'll miss you, you know. I'll miss them more, she said softly. He hesitated. You ever wonder if they'll understand what you really did here? Sarah looked at the flag, now rippling gently against the evening sky. One day, maybe, but I didn't do it for understanding. I did it because silence deserves better leadership than noise. He frowned slightly. Silence. She smiled. You know, the kind of silence that comes after you've done the right thing, the one where no one claps, no one cheers, but you know something's changed. Thompson looked at her, realizing this wasn't just the end of a command. It was the end of a chapter in who she was. That night, before leaving her office for the last time, Sarah turned off the lights and stood by the window once more. The base stretched out before her, quiet, disciplined, strong. She could see the glow of the barracks windows, hear faint laughter from the mess hall. It was working. All of it. On her desk lay a single folder, her successor's briefing packet. On top of it, she had written one line in her neat, precise handwriting. Fort Henderson doesn't need a perfect commander. It just needs someone who believes. She closed the folder, picked up her cap, and headed for the door. At the threshold, she paused, looking back once, her eyes reflecting the light. Then she whispered, barely audible, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The next morning, Fort Henderson woke as it always did, early, sharp, alive. The flag rose with the first light. The soldiers gathered, ran, trained, saluted, not because someone told them to, but because they wanted to. And somewhere far away, on a transport plane cutting through the clouds, Colonel Sarah Martinez sat by the window, watching the sunrise from above. Her reflection merged with the light, soft and strong all at once. And though the base she left behind was miles away, its rhythm still echoed faintly in her chest, steady, proud, unbroken. Fort Henderson was no longer hers. It belonged to every soldier who'd learned that leadership doesn't shout. It listens. It endures. It believes.